any vote that I get in Iowa or New Hampshire will count for Biden.
So the other guy running for president as a Democrat, as you know, is RFK Jr. And every time he says something that makes sense or he gets some traction or his numbers go up in the polls, the Democrats are doing everything they can to take this guy out, including changing the rules in real time about how their primary process works. This is RFK Jr. on the Tim Dillon podcast explaining how the Democrats right now are going out of their way to rig their own primary.
One of the things they've done is they've made it so that any vote that I get in Iowa or New Hampshire will count for Biden. And they're trying to do the same thing now in Georgia.
How are they doing that?
Well, they're passing a rule that if any candidate who steps into the state of New Hampshire or Iowa to campaign will lose all their delegates. And so I've campaigned in both states, so I lose their delegates. But now what they're trying to do is we're going to know on September 14th whether they actually do it, is they're trying to pass another rule that if you step foot in New Hampshire or Iowa, that any vote you get in Georgia, which is a big delegate state, will also count for the president and not for, so they're basically disenfranchising everybody in those states. So there's no campaign. And they're talking about this idea of making myself and Marianne Williamson, who's the other Democratic candidate, to pay for all the primaries ourselves.
You really need to understand how corrupt the Democrats are. Just ask Bernie Sanders about it one day. The idea that if you step foot in one of these places, Iowa or New Hampshire, your candidacy is basically erased. Now, you go, well, how does that make sense? Why would they do that? Well, they are doing it because they know that Joe Biden, because of name recognition and being the incumbent, he doesn't have to run. Last time he ran a basement campaign. We all know that. He barely went anywhere. So RFK, he wants to be out there. Marianne Williamson, no one's going to vote for her, but she wants to be out there. They want to be on the ground meeting people, drumming up grassroots support. That's what you're supposed to do as a candidate. And the DNC, the party itself, is saying, if you show up in this state, if you share your ideas with our voters, we will disqualify you. And the crazy part was the Georgia thing. So it's one thing they're saying, if you show up in Iowa, your Iowa votes aren't going to count. And if you show up in New Hampshire, your New Hampshire votes aren't count. Now they're trying to pass this thing, if you show up in either one of those places, your Georgia votes aren't going to count. These people are so freaking corrupt, and you will not hear about this on MSNBC, and you will not hear about it on CNN or in the Washington Post or the New York Times or anywhere else. RFK explained it just a bit more, and I thought he unpacks it in a nice way. It's worth reiterating.
DNC does not want a primary. They're effectively disenfranchising the Democratic voters from having any choice in who becomes the Democratic nominee. So two of the things they've done today, they've made rules that if any candidate sets foot in the state of Iowa or sets foot in the state of New Hampshire, then none of the votes that are cast for that candidate will be tallied. In other words, any delegate that I win in New Hampshire or Iowa would go instead to the president. And now they're trying to change it so that if I campaign in New Hampshire, that none of the votes cast for me in Georgia will count. And that's significant because it's hard to win the nomination without Georgia. If you add up all the superdelegates that they control and all of the automatic delegates that just go to the party and go to the president, I would have to win almost 80% of all of the states in order to beat President Biden, even if he only wins 20%. You know, we live at a time in American history when a lot of Americans think that democracy is broken, that the political system is rigged, and that there's not really any democracy. And unfortunately, the DNC is taking a lot of steps that confirm that outlook.
You know, you guys know, I often say you don't have to be a Republican, but you cannot be a Democrat. You can say what you want about the Republicans, but when the Republicans had their insurgent candidate in 2016, 2015, actually running, Donald Trump, the RNC itself did not do any tricks to stop him. They had candidates that went up there and tried to beat him, and he took out Marco Rubio and he took out Chris Christie and Jeb and everybody else. But the machinery of the party, they went along with what the Republican base wanted. The DNC, whether you think RFK could actually beat Joe Biden or not, like he probably can't just because of name recognition alone and the power of the presidency and incumbency and all that. But the machine itself is going out of its way to say, screw you, Democrats. The DNC, D stands for Democrat. They don't like their own voters and they don't respect their own voters.